right, Polly Smith. That is Polly there on the left with her sister Flo. My relationship with Polly started 23 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But 23 years ago, it was 1994, and I was working here at the Dallas Historical Society in the library. And, if you had told me then that I would still be talking about her in 2017, I never would have believed it. Now, Polly died in 1980, so I never got the chance to meet her personally. But here's kind of how Polly and I met. There was another librarian here named Galen Pilati. If some of you have been around a long time, you might remember Galen. And Galen and I worked together. And one day he came to me in the G.B. Dealey Library, and he had this stack of black and white photos. And on the back was this name, Polly Smith. And we just loved them. We were poring over them and marveling at the beauty and the quality of them. And we were just really taken with them. And at that time, we didn't know a whole lot about the photos themselves. That collection at the time hadn't been processed. There was a volunteer who came later named Gene, and I thank him for his work getting that collection organized so we could find things easier at a later time. But at the time, it was a little more spaced out in the collection. So we had that name, Polly Smith, didn't know a whole lot about her. But we really wanted to do something with these great photos. They were beautiful. We wanted to do an exhibit of them here at the Hall of State, which never happened until now, so good for them. And we were talking about this project to a member of the Historical Society Board, Hortense Sanger, and saying, well, Polly, we want to do this on Polly Smith, but we don't know a lot about her. And she says, oh, well, I know her sister and have her address. Would you like to be in contact with her? I'm like, wow, she has a sister and you know her? We can get the address? So we did. The sister was Gail North Muscovich in California. She was 89 when I first wrote to her in 1994, and she died in 2010 at age 105. And I was very, very grateful that we continued our correspondence and our acquaintance throughout that whole time. So Gail was really, none of this could have happened without Gail's help. That's Gail on the left, Polly on the right, and that's their mother, Minnie, in the middle. I'm thinking this photo was probably taken in the late 1940s because Minnie died in 1950. So through Gail Muscovich, I got to know some of Polly's nieces and nephews who, are still alive. And so when the Historical Society approached me about doing a book back in 2007, I was able to talk to Gail, who introduced me to these nieces and nephews. And one in particular, Carla Smith, who was the daughter of one of Polly's brothers, Burke Smith, just opened her home and her heart to me, her family's letters and scrapbooks. It was an incredible, incredible gift. So, credit to Galen and to Gail and to Carla for making all this possible, and to the Historical Society for keeping all this. So this is not the same jacket. I just want to say that first. This was myself. That's Galen Pilati there on the right, and our boss in 1994, Cliff Vanderpool. And this was taken at the Texarkana Museum System. They did an exhibit of Polly's photos in 1997, and those yellow roses in the back were sent by Gail Muscovich for the event. So I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the Centennial, how it came about, and what they were trying to do by organizing this more or less World's Fair in the middle of the Great Depression. And I'll talk a little bit about Polly and her family, and then her journey through Texas. And I'll be happy to take some questions at the end. So the Centennial, the idea of the Texas Centennial, which of course was the 100th anniversary of independence from Mexico, started in Corsicana in 1923. And there was a New Yorker who spoke to the advertising clubs of Texas and was trying to convince them that to really promote Texas to the world, they needed to emphasize this glorious romantic history. And everybody loved it. They were cheering, they were forming committees, Centennial. And so yes, we owe it all to a New Yorker, but that's okay. They wanted it to do as well as the 1893 Columbian Exposition had for Chicago. That had put Chicago on the map and said, we're a big city now, we're a player. And Dallas wanted that same sort of exposure. So they all loved the idea, but it kind of languished for years and years and years. And I'm not going to go into that whole very long saga. There's a great book called The Year America Discovered Texas by Kenneth Ragsdale that covers that whole process. So I'm going to jump to 1934 when the state finally said, okay, yes, we will have this centennial and we'll put up some money for it. So of course then they had to choose the host city for the exposition. And there were three main cities. Fort Worth kind of said they wanted to at the first, but then they dropped out. But San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas. And San Antonio felt that it should be the host city because it was the oldest city. It had all this Texas history going for it, and it was a historic celebration. And of course, Houston said they should be the host because they had the Battle of San Jacinto. I mean, the whole point of independence right there. And then Dallas didn't have any history. This is a map in 1844 with no Dallas listed. It was nothing. It was nowhere. But Dallas was run by the businessmen, and they knew that being the host city would be great for business. And they were determined to do whatever it took. So, of course, it all came down to money. And the state said, well, if we don't fund any of it, are you still going to have it? And Houston said no, and San Antonio said no, but Dallas said, we will. And so Dallas was chosen as the site. And I want to clarify something kind of quick. I use it a little bit interchangeably, but there's the Centennial, which was the statewide celebration, and the Centennial Exposition, which of course is Fair Park and that fair. And Polly actually worked for the Exposition. So even though Dallas said, we'll do it no matter what, they really did need the funds. So they started going out and trying to get the state funds and federal funds and everything like that. And they didn't get any until May 7th, 1935. So it was just 8 months after they were selected as the site. The exposition was going to open in June 36, so they had 13 months to build everything. They knew they were going to use Fair Park, which of course had been the state fairgrounds since 1886. And actually they cited the state fair, their experience with the state fair, as one of the reasons why they would do great with this exposition. But of course we all know that the Art Deco buildings were built in 13 months. The other thing that had to happen in those 13 months was that the exposition had to convince all of America in the middle of a Great Depression to come visit Texas that summer in 36. So they had a huge advertising and publicity department for the exposition. They even hired a New York firm to help with all this stuff. And they cranked out all these press releases and stories and everything like that. But when you're trying to sell a location, what's worth 1,000 words? A picture. And that's what they didn't have. So the publicity department sent out requests all over the state. They were contacting the chambers of commerce. They were contacting the railroad businesses, the railways, begging for photos of these areas that they could use. There was no centralized place. There was no tourism bureau where they could have this stuff. It didn't exist. So they didn't have it. They were having to beg. So what they decided to do is to hire somebody to travel the state and get these photos that they needed. And so here we have Polly Smith, 27 years old. She's in Austin, and she's looking for a job. Now, Polly was born Frances Sutaw Smith on December 29th, 1907, in Ruston, Louisiana, to Roy and Marion Burke Smith. She was the middle child of 7 children, and her nickname was Polly because she liked a song called Miss Polly Hopkins as a child. So they always called her Polly, and she went by that professionally. Even on the census roll, she's listed as Polly, not Frances. Her father, Roy, was an itinerant worker. They never earned a lot of money. He's shown as being a farmer, a newspaper salesman, an insurance salesman. I just recently ran across one of his ads selling insurance, and you can trust Roy Smith for your insurance. That was it. That was the whole ad right there. But years later, Polly's brother, C.R. Smith, they were interviewing C.R. and asked what his father did, and C.R.'s comment was, as little as possible. So not a lot of love lost there. So Roy moved the family all over the state. And here you can see all the different places where each child was born. And in 1913, they had settled in Whitney, Texas, so to the south of us, where Marion's brother Robert lived. And that's where their last child, Flo, was born in 1913. But it was here in Whitney in 1916 that the lives of everyone in the family changed forever. The children lived next to a cotton farm, and they picked cotton for a penny a pound. And Gail Muscovich recalls having saved up $8 or $9 this way, so that's a lot of cotton. But one day in 1916, Roy took that money, and he boarded a train out of Whitney, and he never came back. And we don't know why he did this. His father had died in 1916, so possibly he went to Austin to deal with that and then never came back. Polly's mother never said what happened. So what she did say, what Minnie did say, was she gathered them all around the kitchen table, and she told them their father had left and that she did not expect him to return. But she told her children, we have each other, we love each other, we must help each other always, and we will get along. And they did. Her children became CR, a name you might recognize, a leader of the airline industry, particularly American Airlines. Dorothy, a successful dress designer. Gail, a women's program director for the Texas State Radio Network. There's our Polly. Bill, a talented artist. Burke, a greatly loved aviation pioneer, worked with American Airlines. And Flo, who was a very witty writer and journalist. And there's Minnie, and I want to take a moment to talk about Minnie Smith. I don't think you can talk about any of the Smith children without coming back to Minnie. She was an incredible woman, and she had a profound impact on her children and their success. The children revered her, and she may look very grandmotherly there, but that woman was tough. After Roy left to make ends meet, she sold corsets and encyclopedias. She was very active in the Democratic Party, which of course was the party of Texas at that time. She marched for women's suffrage. She was very smart, very determined. She had taught school as a younger woman and had a tremendous work ethic. And one interesting thing about Minnie, in 1920, she was in Hillsborough, and she was a U.S. Census supervisor. So she had a district, and she was coordinating all the census workers who went out for the 1920 census. 1920 was the first year that the Census Bureau had ever hired women for the job, and she was one of 5 in the entire United States. And it was a job you had to be appointed to. It was a kind of a political appointment. You had to go through political channels. So she was appointed to that job. And really cool, just real quickly, the Census Bureau, U.S. Census Bureau, actually contacted me a few weeks ago. They're doing a series of little history flyers, and they were doing one on Minnie and her work with the census in 1920. So later this month, they're actually releasing this little history thing talking about Minnie and her work with the 1920 census. When I was looking at that, one of the areas that she was responsible for the census was Mexia. And they had a lot of trouble getting enough enumerators to go out and count people. So she wrote this letter to the Mexia Weekly Herald in January 1920. And I'm going to read it because I think it says a lot about her. It says, "To the businessmen of Mexia, the census of Mexia has practically been completed. I have employed the most efficient enumerators and have advertised the census in every known way. The enumerators have been cautioned to let no man escape, and they have combed the highways and outskirts of the city. If you know of anyone who has not been enumerated, it is your duty to report them at once to the supervisor or Chamber of Commerce. The portfolios will be sent into Washington this week, and you will have no further opportunity to work for a greater Mexia. Mrs. Roy E. Smith, Supervisor of the Census." I read that and I'm like, man, I wouldn't have crossed her. I mean, I would have gotten that census in. But she received numerous accolades for her work with the census, and it led to her next job as a leader for the industrial census out of Fort Worth, and she was one of only 98 special agents in the entire country, and I think she may have been the only woman to do it at that time. And she turned in the second most number of acceptable schedules to a given time period, and the Census Bureau awarded her a prize. So the paper was interviewing her about this prize, and she says, "Well, if I'd known I was competing, I could have easily have been first." I think it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I think she was serious, too. In 1921, Minnie was appointed to a position in the state health department, so the family moved to Austin. And this is really kind of where the family decided to call home. They weren't moving around the state as much. And this is their house on Rio Grande Avenue, and it had a streetcar running down the middle of the street. But, of course, with 7 children and a single mother, the financial difficulties weren't over. So to make ends meet, Minnie started something that they called the Smith Family Cooperative, which the Dallas Morning News called a sort of human chess game. So what would happen is the older children who had graduated high school would go out to work and go to college part-time, and the money they earned would be put back into the general household fund, and then the younger children could go to school full-time. They did work part-time too. Burke, the youngest, recalled that in 1923 when he was 12, he was a page for the Texas legislature, and he kind of worked his way up. It was, the legislature met every other year, so he could do it. And he said by the time he graduated high school, he was actually making more money than his shop teacher at the high school. But they all contributed to the family purse, and each one of them was able to get some college that way. They all were able to go get a couple of years of college that way, and they made it. And this is a really charming postcard. I don't think a family member drew this, but it's something they had kept, and I thought it was very charming. It may be hard to see, but you can see little names next to some of the children representing each one. And this is very cute and very charming and very lovely. And then there's this photo. And the original was this blurry, so I apologize about that. And it looks like a nice cocktail party. But really, it's hard to tell, but they're all holding guns. They all have pistols along with those glasses. So I think that must have been a really fun party. So I just thought that was a fun photo. Okay, so Polly graduated from Austin High School in 1925. She sang in the choir. She was active in the Literary Society. And in her senior year, she was elected class poet. And I mean, what a dramatic shot in the yearbook there. Now, my guess, I don't know when Polly got interested in photography specifically, but I know in the 1924 yearbook, they talked about a Kodak camera club at the school that was wildly popular, so popular they had to close the membership for it. So, perhaps she got interested in photography that way. After high school, she worked for the State Highway Department as a key punch operator, so, doing the cards like that. She did that for several years. And in 1929, she took her first classes at the University of Texas. And amazingly, I was actually able to get hold of her transcript from the University of Texas. Can you believe that still exists? But I did, and I have a copy of it. Her sister Dorothy was a well-regarded seamstress, and she'd had opened a dress store near the sorority houses, good location. So Polly took a clothing design class, but that didn't last. And then she tried reporting, and that didn't last. And then in 1933, she took a photography class at University of Texas. And at that time, and this was very common for a lot of universities, photography was taught through the physics department. And that was because of the optics involved. So you can imagine they were not all that interested in the artistic merits of photography. It was very technical. So what she did is she went to the Clarence H. White School of Photography in New York City. Now, White was a noted American photographer. He had taught at Columbia's Teachers College before opening his own school, and he believed in something called pictorialism, so that photos are very much a work of art. They should be treated like a work of art. And one thing that was very different about his school, besides that view, was that he actively encouraged women to apply. So there were twice as many women at this school as men. And some of the names, the greatest names of American photography, had gone through the Clarence H. White School: Margaret Bourke White, Dorothea Lange, Laura Gilpin, Carl Struess. And so White had died in 1925, but the school was still operating when Polly got there. And they used a technique called the project method, where the students had to complete this series of technical problems, compositional problems. So for example, oops, there we go. This is her still life project at the White School. This is a composition piece. Yes, they're pretzels. And this is one looking at curves and lines. Now, I think finding this work of Polly's at the Clarence H. White School was probably one of the top 3 or 4 great moments of my research. I mean, it was amazing to find this, because Gail had thought that Polly had worked with a photographer named Stieglitz, which I never thought was quite right. And a lot of the press thought that she had worked with Margaret Bork White, and Gail said, no, she never worked with her. So, what to do with this? I knew she was in New York and studied, but I didn't know how. And then I came across this article about the Clarence H. White School, and I thought, well, that kind of fits. It's the right time. It's the right milieu. Margaret Bork White was there. Stieglitz was there. And the collection was at Princeton. So I thought, okay, what have I got to lose? I called Princeton, talked to the librarian there, told him what I was trying to do. He says, oh yeah, we have her student work. Would you like me to send you copies? I'm like, oh my God, yes. I mean, I couldn't believe that they had her student work from all those years ago in their collection. So archives and libraries are amazingly wonderful things. And I knew it was the right one because of her signature at the bottom. I knew I had the right Polly Smith, because that's most definitely her signature. So in 1935, Polly left New York and came back to Texas, and of course she's looking for a job. And she starts negotiating with the Centennial Exposition Committee, and I mean, everybody was trying to get a job with the Centennial Exposition, of course. So from the Chicago one in 1933, there are records in the Historical Society. People are saying, I'll move down there and sell tickets. They were just desperate for anything. But the exposition usually responded, it is the policy of the exposition to use Texas people wherever possible in the organization. But it also really helped to know somebody, because these jobs were in high demand. There were a lot of politicians asking for their nephews to get jobs and stuff like that. But I think Polly did know somebody, and that is William H. Cottrell. And Cottrell is one of those guys who was into everything, who knew everybody, but stayed out of the limelight a lot. He was very active and influential in the state politics, and he was crucial in securing funding for the exposition. So he was assistant to the general manager of the exposition and was in a great place to bestow jobs. Well, how did she know Cottrell? It might have been through Minnie's work with the Democratic Party. It might have been through this guy, J. Frank Dobie, because Cottrell was a friend of J. Frank Dobie, and Minnie had moved and lived across the street from the Dobies. She and Mrs. Dobie would visit each other's gardens all the time. So I think it's entirely possible that a connection was made that way. So in mid-October 1935, we got 8 months to go before the opening of the exposition, and Polly and the exposition came to an agreement where they would buy $500 worth of her photos per month, which was very good. Now, she was not the exposition's only photographer, but she was the one who traveled the state. The rest of them were here at the exposition, taking a lot of pictures of the Rangerettes, and other things. So she signed her contract, and she got this 2-page single-spaced assignment sheet from her boss, Clyde Vandenberg, who was chief of the magazine division. And right up front, it says, "Don't let this alarm you." And it was a little bit of an alarming list to look at, and she probably needed that, as this was her first real professional assignment. So some of the assignment requests were pioneer shots, old-timers, stagecoaches, spinning wheels, mohair from goat to garment, from scent to sackcloth, from hoof to hide, and hillbilly shots, cabins, and personalities. So I don't know where they thought they were going to get hillbillies in Texas, but whatever. And my favorite line is the last one, where Clyde says, "If possible, get us some live Indians." I think, we kind of wiped those out in the 1880s, but that's okay. So she took this assignment sheet, and started traveling across Texas, usually by car, sometimes by railroad. And she's shown here at Alamo Downs in San Antonio in 1936. And I want to talk about her camera. It's a Graflex home portrait camera. It weighed 17 pounds, like a big bowling ball. And the ads for it described it as rugged and compact. Wouldn't you hate to see the uncompact version? And so that really is how you hold it, like that. You hold it very down low. And so you're looking down the focusing hood and you're making adjustments with the knobs down here. And the film is a 5x7 sheet that you put in this two-sided film holder, and then you put these dark slides in front of it. So you've loaded up the film, put the film into the camera, then you take out the dark slide, you take your picture, put the dark slide back in, take the whole thing out, turn it around, put it back in, take out the dark slide, take your picture, put the dark slide in, and then you can take it out and develop your photos. So she had to do that for each one. And she usually developed her film on location because, she didn't want to leave that location and then not have the shot. And this got a lot easier for her in March 1936 when she got a Ford truck outfitted with what she called an air-conditioned darkroom on the back. And I thought, boy, that's sweet, an air-conditioned darkroom. But I did some research, and I think it was really more of an air circulation system than an air cooling system, which was too bad, I guess, considering the heat. And I do not have a photo of this. This would be like the holy grail of photos for me, is to get a picture of this truck. But it does not exist that I know of. But of course, mobile darkrooms were used during the Civil War, Matthew Brady, that sort of thing. And so she now was driving her truck and going across, and she said she would just stop under the first shady tree and develop her shots. Now, she got a lot of support from her family during this time as well. So her mother, Minnie, kind of acted as the office manager. So the requests would come in to the Austin home, and then Minnie would kind of farm them out to Polly whenever she was contacted. And then she would also mail stuff back to Dallas. And Polly's brother, Bill, also helped out. He was working for Eugene Savage, creating the large murals in the Hall Estate above us. So sometimes Bill would act as a courier, bringing stuff back to, between Austin and Dallas. And I want to take a moment about this. Let's see. Bill is the guy in the hat, second from the left. So the family legend is, you'll probably recognize this piece of the mural upstairs. The family legend is that the painter is Bill. He painted himself gazing at one of CR's DC-3 airlines in there. So that's kind of the in-family joke for Bill and CR. Now, of course, there were a lot of hardships for Polly going on this trip, and not the least of which was the roads. The speed limit was 45, which everybody hated even then. And I loved reading the Centennial brochures talking about these paved highways and dustless roads. Well, yes, and in between there were a lot of unpaved highways and very muddy roads that they didn't mention. And I was amused. Please drive carefully, not friendly, carefully, and I think they really needed it on those roads. The weather didn't often cooperate. She called Houston cold, dark, and dreary in December 1935. She mentions battling police in San Antonio, trying to get shots planned. And I've always found this photo kind of interesting. A blind beggar outside of the church wouldn't have been my first choice for tourism, but it works. It's a beautiful photo. And in San Antonio, she ran into some trouble when her camera was stolen from her car. And the details of this theft are very few, but clearly this was a tremendous loss. It was an expensive camera. It was how she was earning her living. Gail said that she often left the car unlocked, so somebody just probably stole it, and Polly herself called it my great loss. So now she had to get money from the Centennial, get an advance from the exposition, and order new equipment from New York and wait for it to come in. And she, of course, she's feeling bad because she's letting the exposition down. And the exposition was in financial trouble, and they were laying people off. So it was a very tough time for her. But she eventually got the camera equipment back in. She had her Ford truck, and she was back in business. And of course, now the exposition is opening in about 3 months. So after she got her new equipment, she headed west to cover that portion of the state. And I have found I only know of one really good West Texas photo that the Historical Society has. And I'd come across this article talking about this famous image that Polly Smith had done of the Coconut Ranch around Alpine, and they said she'd sold over 1,000 copies, and I'm like, why can't I find one? This came from microfilm, so that's the poor quality of the work. But another miracle happened, and a gentleman who had read the book emailed me and said that he had a copy of that photo, and he mailed me a copy of it. Yeah, it was like, wow, I had no idea that much was going on in that photo. So the Centennial Promotion Department used her photos to push the message, come to Texas for the Centennial, to every conceivable outlet. For a woodworking magazine, they sent pictures of lumber in the piney woods. The 1930s saw big growth in the Texas dairy industry, so they promoted these modern milking machines and contented cows. And that these were actually sent to Holstein Friesian World magazine. The Illinois Central Railroad had an in-house publication, and so they sent them photos of the scenic beauty of Texas to that area. And that one at the top left, that is Polly. She had set a timer. She called that one Polly Walking South. So that is Polly in that photo. The middle one is Austin, and then the other one is the Rio Grande Valley. She tried to include as much diversity as she could. This was in the lower Rio Grande Valley. It's one of my favorites. This is another one of my favorites. This is an Alabama Coushatta woman, so live Indians, Josephine Batiste, and the Batiste family is actually still very involved in tribal administration today. Cotton workers, of course, cotton was huge for the Texas economy. Students at the University of Texas, they do not dress this way at my university anymore. Of course, the oil fields of East Texas. A Houston harbor. Rio Grande Valley, the Sherryland. My one West Texas photo of a chuck wagon. And she liked to feature the sky in a lot of her images. Her niece Carla said that's what always struck her about Polly's images was the use of the sky. This is called Elson Yard with guitar. These were Polly's names for it. Mission La Espada in San Antonio. And a farm scene near Austin. Now, Polly's photos received very, very high praise. Clyde Vandenberg said that hers were the only decent photographs to come out of Texas. The New York advertising firm said they were, without question, the best material they had seen. Places like magazines like Vogue and Town and Country were interested in the Centennial because of the quality of her photos. Otherwise, they couldn't have gotten in the door with that. But her photos helped the advertising firm get in the door of some of these high-class publications. Although the artistic quality was a little bit much, Clyde Vandenberg said it's a little bit much for the Angora goat raiser. To turn down the artistic for the Angora Goat Raiser magazine. Now, the Centennial wasn't afraid to use Polly's photos to suit their needs. For example, this is an image of a Tigua Indian woman, but the Centennial labeled her a Mexican peasant. They didn't let the truth get in the way of a good photo. So, I know a couple of those where they did that. But this is actually a Tigua Indian woman. So after the exposition ended, Polly continued to make good use of these same Centennial photos. So this one appeared in Texas Parade magazine, which also called Polly one of the finest artists with a camera in 1938. She sold it to other outlets. Some of it appeared in a book called You and Your Camera by Eleanor King. But Polly's contract with the exposition ended when the exposition opened in June 1936. And of course, this is opening day, a big parade through downtown Dallas. And Polly's sister, Gail North, who worked for WFAA radio, was in an American Airlines airplane with Governor Allred, and they were throwing gardenias down to the crowd on opening day. And of course, Fort Worth had their Frontier Centennial going at the same time, and their tagline was, "Go to Dallas for education, come to Fort Worth for fun." So I'm going to play a little video clip, just about 90 seconds.
My friends of Texas, I have come here today to bear the tribute of the nation to you on your 100th birthday, for you are 100 years young. And what a birthday party. A huge $25 million exposition in Dallas with all Texas playing host. 200 acres of magnificent buildings, a new city, a great city, a city of 1,000 sights and 1,000 wonders. Small wonder, then, that the whole nation is talking about this big Texas exposition. The design of the buildings is distinctively Southwestern, a dramatic combination of modern architecture and the simple beauty of the old world. The motif is carried throughout, even to the final touch of stately statues, brilliant fountains, and striking mural decorations. But there go the crowds, rushing to see this tremendous spectacle at the rate of more than 50,000 a day. It's a long trek to see all the sights, and you'll need a cane.
That's available, obviously, online if you wanted to watch the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. Later on in that video, the announcer says, "Did someone make a remark about the Dallas Exposition being all education and no entertainment? Well, not from the looks of this." And they have these ladies doing these high kicks, dancing, and then they go to Madame Corinne, the apple dancer. Of course, this famous shot of the Esplanade. And as you know, Polly's photos are mounted on glass in the East and North Texas rooms, and she didn't know that was going to happen. That was a surprise to her. They printed them on glass and had them mounted, so that was something she didn't know was coming. After the exposition, she spent the next 10 years freelancing for different companies, including the Matador Ranch, northeast of Lubbock, Delta Airlines, of course, American Airlines. She did a lot of work for their in-house magazine. And one of her longer jobs was at the Dallas Aviation School in Love Field from 1939 to 1942. That's Polly on the right and Flo on the left. Flo did the copy, the advertising copy for the catalogs, while Polly did the photography. Here's some examples of her work for the school. The aviation school was one of the schools selected to train British pilots for the Royal Air Force. And of course, they also trained thousands of American pilots. And let's see, she continued taking photos of the environment too, pictures of course, cotton taken around 1940. And these were another chance find for me. I had read an article in the Dallas Morning News about a gentleman who had worked for the Dallas Aviation School about that same time period. And he owned a hobby shop in Irving, MAL Hobby. And so I thought, what the heck, I'll call and see if he remembers Polly. And so I did, and his son answered the phone, and I'm telling him what I want. And he says, "I wonder if that's what those slides are in the back." And it's like, yes, it was. So Polly had thrown away these slides at the Dallas Aviation School, and this guy had fished them out of the trash and kept them in the back of his hobby shop for 50 years. And I mean, he didn't even know her, but there they were, and I knew they were hers because Gail had sent me some images from the same series that matched up, so I knew they were Polly's. It's amazing what people keep. Now, after she left the Dallas Aviation School, her photography career started to decline, and she moved to California, couldn't really find any photography work. Then she went back to school and took a sculpting class, and she became completely absorbed in painting and sculpting, and that's really what she concentrated on for the rest of her life. And there she is sketching. And after World War II, she became a much more private, reclusive person, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One was family reasons. Her mother was declining in health, and she was helping to take care of her. And of course, Minnie died in 1950. And then in 1956, that's Flo on the right, they were very close, and Flo died of cancer very young, leaving behind 2 young children. And Polly herself had breast cancer twice, and that is what led to her death in 1980. So there were those kind of reasons, but really the larger issue was she began suffering from mental illness after the war, and it left her unable to work. It was very debilitating. So she lived with Gail in California and focused on her artwork for the rest of her life. She never married. She never had children. She wasn't a prolific letter writer, so there wasn't a lot of that to fall back on. But she was very close to her family. They always remained extremely close throughout their entire lives. And this isn't a sad story by any means. Polly told Gail before she died, "I've been happy all my life." And Gail said she had a lot of serenity as a person. So while Polly wasn't the only female photographer working in Texas at the time, there she was taking this journey alone by herself across Texas. At a time when it wasn't as easy to do as it is now. And I mean, she went from every corner, from El Paso to the Piney Woods, from the Panhandle down to the Rio Grande Valley. And she was trying to show a vision of Texas beyond just the cowboy and the cactus. There was that romantic past, but there was also the idea that Texas was moving forward, that it was a great place to be for business. It was a modern place. And she was showing that through her photos. And the quality of her work stands up to the test of time. It's still very beautiful and very evocative. And, as I said earlier, Polly died in 1980, so I never have had the chance to meet her personally. But, I feel like I know her through the research and through talking with so many of her family members. And I have to say, she would have just been delighted at the exhibit going on upstairs, and that you all have come out tonight to hear. And I know Gail would just be so proud. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I will be around later if you think of something else. Yes, ma'am.
Years ago, when I first trained with Elson, they said, that the artist painted himself, but they said, somebody told me that the dark-haired lady was Polly and the blonde was his sister.
Now that's interesting that he painted his sisters in along with himself. I hadn't heard that.
Her sister. Polly's sister.
Yeah. Yeah, so Polly was one of the ladies and one of the sisters?
They told me that, and they were giving me my training, and I don't know if that's true or not.
That's interesting. I heard the story about Bill and the airplane from Bill's daughter, but she didn't mention that. That's interesting.
Well, I don't even remember who told me.
That's cool, though. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it.